Hi Guy, tonight we journey to the foot of Gyeomsungdi Observatory in Silla's ancient capital, now Joseon-era Gyeongju, where the stars whisper secrets only the stones can hear. It's a night thick with the scent of pine and wood smoke, a night where a dream can change the course of history. Or maybe just ruin your sleep. You probably won't survive this, by the way, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see how global this little bedtime story community is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are a farmer. The year is 1633, 10 years into King Injo's reign. As twilight deepens, you trudge up the gentle slope at the foot of Gyeomsungde. The observatory's stones cool against your calloused hand. The day's labor, coaxing life from the stubborn earth, has settled deep in your bones, a pleasant ache that speaks of honest work. Historical fact, Gyeomsungde, built in the 7th century Silla, is the oldest existing astronomical observatory in East Asia. Imagine, those very stones you touch have witnessed centuries of history unfold beneath these same stars. Quirky tidbit. Some Joseon scholars believe the observatory wasn't for observing stars at all, but for shamanistic sky rituals. Perhaps a shaman once stood on this very spot, invoking the spirits with chants and offerings, seeking answers in the celestial dance. Open debate. Historians still argue whether Queen Seondeok, who likely commissioned Gyeomsungde, was a patron of astronomy or simply using the structure as a symbol of royal power. She probably just wanted a cool tower to hang out in. Whatever her reasons, she left behind a legacy that touches your hand tonight. Life as a farmer in Joseon isn't easy. The days are long, the work backbreaking, and the harvests often meager. Rice paddies stretch out like watery mirrors, reflecting the endless cycle of seasons. Your days are marked by the rising and setting sun, by the rhythm of planting, weeding, and harvesting. The taxes are heavy, the magistrates demanding, and the threat of famine always lurks in the shadows. Yet, there's a quiet dignity in this life. A connection to the land that runs deeper than any royal decree. Your family, huddled around the hearth in your small thatched roof house, is your world. Their laughter, their worries, their dreams, these are the things that truly matter. The simple act of providing for them, of seeing them fed and sheltered, fills you with a profound sense of purpose. The slope at the foot of Gyeomsungde is quiet tonight, save for the chirping of crickets and the distant bark of a dog. The air is still, heavy with the scent of pine needles and the faintest trace of wood smoke carried on the breeze from the village below. The world shrinks to this small circle of earth, this ancient monument, and the vast expanse of sky above. The night sky, ablaze with stars undimmed by electric lights, stretches out like a velvet tapestry embroidered with celestial fire. Each flicker, each constellation holds meaning. Your ancestors believed these patterns and movements held messages from the spirits, warnings of impending doom or promises of bountiful harvests. You trace the familiar outlines of the Great Bear, the plow, the weaver girl, and the cowherd, separated by the celestial river of the Milky Way. Tonight, the stars seem particularly bright, their light pulsing with an almost unearthly intensity. You feel a strange pull, a sense of connection to something vast and ancient. The whispers of the stars seem to penetrate the very stones of Gyeomsungde, resonating deep within your soul. A shiver runs down your spine, a mixture of awe and unease. Is it the cool night air, or something more? You've always felt a certain reverence for this place, a sense of history pressing down on you. Tonight that feeling is intensified, amplified by the stillness of the night and the brilliance of the stars. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing in the cool night air, letting the tranquility of the place wash over you. It's a rare moment of peace, a respite from the constant worries of daily life. Just you, the ancient stones, and the whispering stars. But as you stand there, lost in contemplation, a subtle shift in the air, a flicker at the edge of your vision, pulls you back to the present. You open your eyes, and the world tilts. The familiar constellations seem to swirl and shift, The ground beneath your feet feels unsteady. The chirping of the crickets fades, replaced by a low, humming sound that seems to emanate from the very stones of Gyeomseongdae. The scent of pine gives way to something different, something ancient, something otherworldly. You feel a presence, a watchful gaze, and you know, with a certainty that chills you to the bone, that you are not alone. Something is about to happen. Something extraordinary. The wind, a whispering caress against my skin, carried the scent of burning mugwort. It curled into my nostrils, a familiar aroma intertwined with memories of flickering candlelight and hushed chanting, the unmistakable signature of a shamanistic ritual. I'd seen such rituals before, glimpses from the periphery, always feeling a pull of fascination mixed with a healthy dose of trepidation. I saw her then, a figure etched against the emerging moon, a slender crescent of silver in the inky sky. She stood on the slope at the foot of Gyeomseongdae, the ancient observatory looming behind her like a benevolent giant. The shaman's silhouette was stark, almost otherworldly against the rising moon. Even from a distance, I could sense the air of power that clung to her, like the smoke from the burning herbs. Shamans, I knew, held a powerful role in our Joseon villages. History spoke of them, often women, as conduits between the spirit world and the human realm, interpreters of dreams, healers of the sick, and protectors against malevolent forces. They were the keepers of ancient lore, whispered from generation to generation, woven into the fabric of our lives. It was a position of respect, yes, but also tinged with a touch of fear. I remembered my grandmother telling me stories about the village shaman, her voice laced with both reverence and apprehension. She'd spoke of the shaman's ability to commune with the spirits, to bargain with them, to appease them. She had also warned of the potential consequences of crossing a shaman, of the curses they could unleash upon those who earned their disfavor. Grandmother had also mentioned, almost as an aside, the shaman's fondness for mugwort tea. Apparently, besides being used in rituals to cleanse and purify, mugwort was believed to have medicinal properties, soothing stomach ailments and promoting restful sleep. It even made a nice tea, she'd said, her eyes twinkling. I'd never tried it myself, but the thought of a warm cup on a chilly night like this was suddenly quite appealing. The night was quiet, unusually so. The usual sounds of village life, the barking of dogs, the murmurs of conversation, the creak of wooden carts, were absent, swallowed by the stillness. Even the crickets seemed to hold their breath, as if in deference to the ritual unfolding before me. The only sound was the soft crackle of the burning mugwort, and the whisper of the wind through the pine trees that dotted the slope. The scent of pine and mugwort hung thick in the air, a heady blend that both invigorated and calmed. I paused, hesitant, my feet rooted to the spot. Shamans, with their connection to the unseen, held a certain power, a power that could bring blessings or curses. They navigated the treacherous currents of the spirit world, a realm hidden from ordinary eyes. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a prickle of unease mixed with an undeniable curiosity. What was she doing there, alone on the slope beneath Gyeomseongdae in the dead of night? Scholars and historians still debated the role of shamanism in our society. Some argued that it was a unifying force, a spiritual anchor in a world rife with uncertainty. Others dismissed it as mere superstition, a source of social division and fear-mongering. They wrote lengthy treatises filled with complex arguments, citing historical precedents and sociological theories. I wondered if any of them had ever sat down with a shaman, shared a cup of mugwort tea, and listened to the stories they held within their hearts. Perhaps, just perhaps, if they had, their perspectives might be different. They probably never tried the tea, I mused, a small smile playing on my lips. The shaman raised her arms towards the sliver of moon, her voice, low and melodic, rising and falling in a rhythmic chant. I couldn't understand the words, but they seemed to resonate with the very air around me, vibrating with an unseen energy. The burning mugwort sent plumes of fragrant smoke swirling around her, creating an ethereal halo. I felt a pull, a strange compulsion to move closer, to witness the unfolding ritual, to understand the mystery she held within her grasp. I knew the risks. I knew the whispers that followed shamans, the tales of their power, both benevolent and malevolent. Yet something drew me forward, an invisible thread connecting me to the woman silhouetted against the moon. It was more than curiosity. It was a feeling of being called, summoned by a force I couldn't comprehend. The slope beckoned. The scent of mugwort and pine a fragrant invitation. Taking a deep breath, I started walking towards the shaman, towards the rising moon, towards the mysteries that awaited me in the shadow of Keomsangde. The night was still young, and the whispers of the spirits were carried on the wind. The shaman beckoned me forward, a gnarled hand emerging from the folds of her white hanbok. The flickering firelight danced in the deep lines etched on her face, casting strange, shifting shadows. I trudged up the slope, the dry earth crumbling beneath my worn straw sandals. A little reluctant, yes, but also curious. Curiosity, that blasted trait, always had me poking my nose where it didn't belong. I hoped this summons was a blessing, not a curse. Curses really messed with my harvests. Last year, Old Man Park got cursed by the butcher's wife, and his cabbages came up looking like shriveled turnips. I couldn't afford that kind of misfortune. Joseon society, they say, always had this push and pull with shamanism. The Yangban, the fancy folk in the capital, with their Confucian books and their noses held high, they tried to squash it out like a stubborn weed. But out here, in the villages, where life clung to the edge of the rice paddy and the mercy of the heavens, we relied on the shamans. For healing, for guidance, for a whisper of hope in the long, dark nights. They say, and this is a strange one, that if you sneezed during a shamanistic ritual, a spirit was trying to talk to you. Or you had a cold. Hard to tell, really. I hoped it was just allergies. I'd been sniffling since the barley harvest. Even now, learned men, those historians who scratch away at old scrolls, they argue about it all. Did the hard times, the famines that swept across the land like hungry ghosts, the epidemics that left villages empty and silent, did all that make us cling tighter to the shamans? Did it push us to seek solace in the spirit world, where perhaps, just perhaps, there were answers we couldn't find in the empty rice bowls? Sneezing probably didn't help either, I imagine, all that close contact. I reached the top of the slope, my breath slightly ragged. The shaman waited, her eyes, dark pools reflecting the firelight, fixed on me. I offered a small bow, the straw of my hat brushing the ground. Respect was due, even if I was unsure about all this spirit business. Besides, I didn't want to sneeze now. My allergies were acting up. We stood at the foot of Keomsangde, the ancient observatory looming above us like a silent giant. Its stones, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, seemed to absorb the moonlight, radiating a pale, ethereal glow. The full moon, a perfect silver disk, hung suspended in the velvet darkness, bathing the world in its soft light. The night sky, still and clear, stretched endlessly above. The stars, countless and brilliant, were scattered across the darkness like diamonds flung across a velvet cloth. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the nearby trees, whispering secrets only the spirits could understand. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, a sweet, pungent aroma that clung to the back of my throat. The shaman began to chant, her voice low and rhythmic, a hypnotic drone that seemed to weave itself into the fabric of the night. The flames in the brazier leaped and danced, casting flickering shadows that writhed and twisted on the ground. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a primal unease that settled deep in my belly. Was it the spirits, or just the chill night air? The chanting grew louder, more insistent, the rhythm pulsing like a heartbeat. The shaman's body swayed, her arms moving in graceful, fluid motions, as if she were conducting some unseen orchestra. My eyes were fixed on her, mesmerized by the strange, otherworldly dance. The scent of incense grew stronger, filling my nostrils, making my head swim. Then it happened. A sudden, sharp sneeze erupted from me, shattering the stillness of the night. The shaman stopped chanting abruptly, her eyes widening. She stared at me, her expression unreadable. My heart pounded in my chest. Was it a spirit? Or just my blasted allergies? The shaman spoke, her voice low and husky. The spirits have heard your call. They have a message for you. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. A message? For me? What could the spirits possibly want with a simple farmer like me? The shaman's voice, usually vibrant with the rhythms of her chants and prayers, was thin and reedy, like dry leaves rustling in the first breath of winter. "I dreamt," she whispered, her eyes distant, unseeing. "A troubling dream," she told of a sky ablaze, stars cascading like silver tears across the velvet backdrop of night. The world became brighter than day, a blinding, searing light that bleached the color from everything. Then, just as suddenly, it was swallowed by an oppressive darkness, a darkness so profound it seemed to extinguish hope itself. And in that darkness, she spoke of famine, its skeletal hand clutching at empty bellies, of war, brother turned against brother in a desperate struggle for survival, of death, a constant companion stalking the land. She saw a dragon, black as the void between the stars, rise from the very foot of Joseon. Its wings, vast and leathery, blotted out what little light remained, casting the world into deeper shadow. My breath hitched. The tale of the black dragon, a creature of ill omen, a harbinger of misfortune, echoed in my memory. It was a story whispered around firesides, a cautionary legend passed down through generations. A shiver traced its path down my spine, a cold premonition settling in the pit of my stomach. Dreams, they held a weight, a significance in Joseon culture that those outside our land could scarcely comprehend. They weren't just the fleeting images of a sleeping mind. They were messages, pronouncements, delivered by our ancestors, by the spirits that walked alongside us, unseen, unheard, yet ever present. A dream could foretell a bountiful harvest, a joyous union, or, as in this case, a catastrophe waiting to unfold. It was said, and I recall my grandmother telling me this with a grim shake of her head, that to dream of a lost tooth was to dream of your own demise. Or, she would add with a twinkle in her eye, perhaps it just meant you were going to lose a tooth. Such morbid humor often accompanied these interpretations, a way, perhaps, of tempering the fear that such premonitions instilled. Even now, scholars, learned men who pore over ancient texts and debate the nuances of history, argue whether dream interpretation was a legitimate form of divination, a genuine window into the future, or merely a reflection of the anxieties that plague society. They argued, dissected, and analyzed, but perhaps they should heed the warning of the dream of the lost tooth and simply stop dreaming of teeth altogether. I shifted uneasily on my mat, the shaman's words painting a vivid, terrifying picture in my mind. The dragon, I could almost see it, its scales like polished obsidian, catching and reflecting the non-existent light, its eyes like burning coals, blazing with malevolent intent. Each beat of its enormous wings seemed to exhale shadows, to breathe misfortune onto the land. The slope at the foot of Gyeomsungdae, I knew the place well. A gentle incline covered in a soft carpet of grass, offering an unobstructed view of the stars. It was a place of quiet contemplation, a place where one could feel connected to the heavens. Now, the shaman's dream had painted it with a brush dipped in dread. The night outside was quiet, deceptively peaceful. The wind, whispering through the pines that stood sentinel around the village, carried the faint, earthy scent of pine needles and the distant bark of a dog. The serenity was a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within me, fueled by the shaman's dream. Could it be true? Could such devastation truly befall us? The black dragon, a myth, a legend. But what if the legends were more than just stories? What if they were warnings, echoes of past catastrophes, meant to guide us, to protect us from repeating the mistakes of our ancestors? The shaman's dream, so vivid, so disturbing, felt like more than just a dream. It felt like a prophecy. And the image of the black dragon rising from the foot of Gyeomsungdae clung to me, a dark premonition that I couldn't shake. The quiet of the night seemed pregnant with a terrible anticipation, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the dawn and for what the dawn might bring. "What does it mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The dream clung to me, a chilling premonition wrapped in the swirling mists of sleep. The shaman, her eyes ancient and knowing, didn't answer directly. Instead, a gnarled finger, its skin like parchment, pointed towards the dark silhouette rising against the star-dusted canvas of the night. "Gyeomsungdae," she rasped, the word a dry leaf rustling in the wind. "It holds a secret that must be revealed." She leaned closer, her breath warm against my ear. "The stones will whisper the truth," she murmured, "but only to those who dare to listen." Gyeomsungdae. The observatory. Built long ago by the Scylla, a place whispered to be imbued with ancient power, a nexus of forgotten knowledge. The memory of its imposing structure, its enigmatic presence, sent a shiver down my spine. I remembered learning about the Scylla, the dynasty that came before the Joseon, the ones who had unified the Korean peninsula back in the 7th century. A feat of strength and strategy, a pivotal moment in our history. I also recalled a rather unusual tidbit about Scylla royalty. They apparently sometimes consumed powdered gold. Powdered gold! A sign of their power and purity, so the stories claimed. I couldn't help but wonder about the practicalities of such a practice. I doubted it did wonders for their digestion. Of course, the history of the Scylla, like so much of the past, is open to interpretation. Historians still debate whether they were truly a unified kingdom, a single entity ruled by a powerful monarch, or more of a collection of powerful clans constantly vying for dominance, bound together by fragile alliances and shifting loyalties. I suppose they also argue about how they managed to digest all that gold. With the shaman's words echoing in my mind, I turned towards Gyeongseongdae, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. The moon, a silver disk in the inky sky, bathed the observatory in an ethereal glow, making it seem even larger, more imposing than it did in the daylight. It loomed over the landscape, a silent sentinel guarding secrets lost to time. I trudged forward, my feet crunching on the dry earth. The slope at the foot of Gyeongseongdae was bathed in moonlight, the individual blades of grass shimmering like silver threads. The air was still, holding its breath as if anticipating some momentous event. The night was quiet, profoundly so, broken only by the faint murmur of voices carried on the wind from the distant village. A dog barked, the sound sharp and sudden, then silence descended again, deeper and more profound than before. As I drew closer, I could feel a palpable shift in the atmosphere. A subtle hum, a low thrumming vibration seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. I reached out, my hand hovering just above the cool, weathered surface. I hesitated, a sudden wave of doubt washing over me. Was I truly ready to hear what the stones had to say? What secrets lay hidden within these ancient walls? The shaman's words resonated in my mind, only to those who dare to listen. Taking a deep breath, I pressed my palm against the rough stone, closing my eyes. I focused on the feeling of the stone beneath my fingertips, its cool, solid presence grounding me. I listened, straining to hear something beyond the silence, beyond the faint whisper of the wind. At first, there was nothing, just the steady thump of my own heart against my ribs. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to sense something else. A faint vibration, a low hum that seemed to resonate deep within the stone itself. It grew stronger, more insistent, as if the observatory itself was waking from a long slumber. Images began to flicker behind my eyelids, flashes of color, fleeting glimpses of figures moving in the darkness. Whispers, faint and indistinct, danced at the edges of my hearing. I felt a sense of overwhelming age, of countless generations passing before these very stones. The weight of history pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I saw glimpses of Scylla royalty, adorned in elaborate robes, their faces obscured by shadows. I saw processions winding their way up the slope, chanting ancient prayers under the watchful gaze of the moon. I saw astronomers meticulously charting the movements of the stars, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of oil lamps. Then, a different image emerged, sharp and clear. A figure cloaked in darkness, standing atop the observatory, their arms outstretched towards the heavens. A feeling of dread washed over me, cold and suffocating. Who was this figure, and what was their purpose? The whispers grew louder, coalescing into a single, urgent voice. It spoke of a prophecy, of a coming darkness that threatened to engulf the land. It spoke of a hidden power, a key to unlocking a forgotten magic. And it spoke of me. I pulled my hand away, my heart pounding in my chest. The images faded, the whispers receding into the silence. I stood there, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of what I had seen and heard. The observatory loomed above me, silent and enigmatic once more. The secret, it seemed, was only beginning to reveal itself. And I, whether I was ready or not, was now a part of it. The observatory stones were smooth and cool against my hand. A shiver, not entirely from the chill night air, ran down my spine. Who else had touched these stones? Queens? Astronomers meticulously charting the dance of the celestial bodies? Shamans, perhaps, sneezing into the wind, their pronouncements echoing across the kingdoms? I ran my fingers along the curve of the stone, tracing the path of forgotten hands. Pressing my ear against the cool stone, I listened. The shaman had promised whispers, echoes of the past clinging to these ancient stones. At first, there was only the rustling of the pine needles in the night breeze. Then, slowly, like the rising of a distant constellation, I began to hear them. Whispers, carried on the wind. Fragments of conversations, snatches of songs, the murmur of history itself. I heard the echoes of Scylla astronomers, their voices hushed with awe as they tracked the movements of the stars. They spoke of constellations unknown to me, of celestial alignments that foretold the changing of seasons, the fortunes of kings. They argued, debated, their voices sharp with the passion of discovery. And then, a different voice, clearer, stronger. A woman's voice, imbued with an authority that transcended time. Queen Seondeok. I could almost see her, standing here as I stood, her gaze fixed on the heavens. I remembered what I had learned of her, the first female ruler in Korean history, a woman who reigned from 632 to 647, a powerful ruler known for her wisdom and patronage of the arts and sciences. She had gazed upon these same stars, pondered the same mysteries. Had she, too, felt the weight of history upon her shoulders? Had she sought answers in the movements of the celestial bodies? History books had painted her as a wise and just ruler. But what of the woman behind the crown? What were her fears, her dreams? Did she, too, feel the prickle of fear in the face of the unknown? A quirky thought popped into my head. Queen Seondeok was rumored to have predicted her own death. A premonition whispered on the wind, or perhaps simply the astute observation of a skilled physician? Or, maybe, just maybe, she'd grown tired of the endless cycle, the constant pressure of ruling a kingdom. Perhaps she'd simply welcomed the release. I pulled away from the stone, a little dizzy from the influx of whispers. The debate of historians echoed in my mind. They still argued, even now, about the extent of Queen Seondeok's power, the influence of Buddhism during her reign. Did the Buddha dream of teeth, too? The absurd thought, a strange juxtaposition against the weight of history, made me smile. Sometimes, even in the face of ancient mysteries, the mundane intruded. The wind shifted, carrying new whispers. The clash of steel, the cries of soldiers. Wars fought on these very lands, dynasties rising and falling like tides. The endless cycle of fortune and misfortune, playing out across the centuries. The whispers became a cacophony, a swirling vortex of sound that threatened to pull me under. I stumbled back from the observatory, my breath catching in my throat. I needed to ground myself, to find something solid in the swirling mists of the past. I looked down, focusing on the base of Gyeomsangdae, the solid stone beneath my feet. The oldest astronomical observatory in East Asia. It had stood for centuries, a silent witness to the ebb and flow of history. I inhaled deeply. The scent of pine, thick in the air, was a familiar scent, grounding, reassuring. The night was quiet, broken only by the distant bark of a dog. The present, solid and real, began to reassert itself. The whispers faded, receding like the tide. But they lingered still, a subtle hum beneath the surface of the silence, a reminder that the past was never truly gone. It lived on, embedded in the stones, carried on the wind, waiting to be heard by those who knew how to listen. I stood there for a long time, the cool night air against my skin, the scent of pine in my nostrils, the echoes of the past resonating within me. The weight of history was heavy, but it was also a source of wonder, a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity. A low rumble emanates from the stones beneath my feet, a deep, guttural growl that vibrates up through my legs and into my chest. It grows louder, the ground trembling now, a slight tremor at first that quickly escalates into a tangible shaking. I stumble back, alarmed, my hand instinctively reaching out to steady myself against the cold, rough stone of the observatory wall. The air crackles with an unseen energy, thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. The distant stars seem to flicker and dim, swallowed by an encroaching darkness. And then I see it. Emerging from the shadows that cling to the base of Gyeomsungdae, a hulking silhouette takes shape against the moonlit sky. It's the dragon. The black dragon from the shaman's dream. Larger than any creature I've ever imagined, it unfolds from the darkness like a nightmare made flesh. Its scales gleam with an oily sheen, catching the pale moonlight, each one a polished obsidian shard reflecting the terror back into my eyes. A wave of heat washes over me, the air thick with the smell of sulfur and ozone. It lowers its massive head, its eyes, twin embers burning in the darkness, fix on me. Dragons, especially black dragons, ominous symbols, harbingers of disaster. I remember the whispers in the marketplace, the hushed tones of the elders recounting the old tales. Dragons were creatures of myth, legends passed down through generations. They were associated with natural calamities, with floods and droughts, with earthquakes that swallowed villages whole. They were portents of political unrest, omens of war and the fall of kingdoms. But dragons were also more than just symbols of destruction. They were believed to hold sway over the very rains that nourished the rice paddies, the lifeblood of Joseon. A good harvest, a prosperous year, all depended on the whims of these mythical beasts. The old wives' tales spoke of catching a dragon's tears, potent drops that could ensure fertile fields and bountiful crops. A fanciful notion, of course, but one that spoke to the desperate hope of a people tied to the land. Even now, scholars and historians debate the true nature of dragon lore. Was it a deeply held religious belief, an article of faith passed down through generations? Or was it simply a way to explain the inexplicable, the unpredictable forces of nature that shaped their lives? Or perhaps, a more cynical voice whispers in my mind, was it a clever tool used by the shamans, a way to instill fear and ensure their continued influence? A way to scare farmers into paying for rain dances and offerings to appease the mythical beasts. The dragon opens its maw, and a sound emerges. Not the roar I expected, but a low, resonant whisper. It reverberates through the air, through the very stones of Gyeomsungdae, and into my bones. It's not a sound made of air and vibrations, but a sound made of fear and premonition. And I understand what it means. The shaman's dream. It wasn't just a dream, it was a warning about the coming disaster, a disaster that would shake the very foundations of Joseon. The Manchu invasion. The words echo in my mind, cold and sharp like shards of ice. The Manchu, a powerful, ruthless tribe from beyond the Yalu River. Whispers of their growing strength have been circulating for months, dismissed by some as idle gossip, feared by others as a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. Now, standing here, in the shadow of the dragon, I know those whispers are true. The dream, the dragon, the whisper, they are all connected. The base of Gyeomsungdae, a place of quiet contemplation, of celestial observation, is now a place of dread. The stillness of the night, once a source of peace, is now heavy with foreboding. The quiet, broken only by the distant bark of a dog, seems to amplify the silence in my own heart. The coming storm, I know, will not be one of wind and rain, but of steel and fire. The dragon's whisper has confirmed my worst fears. The invasion is coming, and Joseon is not prepared. My breath hitched in my throat, each gasp a ragged claw against the lining. My legs burned, each stride a desperate plea to the earth to hold me, propel me faster. I burst through the quiet paths of the village, a whirlwind of panic in the stillness. The shaman, the dragon, he dreamt of fire, of scales, of a whisper from the heavens. My voice, raw and strained, echoed through the narrow lanes, bouncing off the wooden walls of the houses. The fear that had gripped me on that windswept slope, that icy tendril snaking around my heart, had spread through the village faster than a sneeze in a ritual. Doors creaked open, spilling light and confused faces into the night. One by one, then in twos and threes, people emerged from their homes, blinking against the sudden intrusion. Lamps were lit, their flickering flames turning the village into a constellation of warm, uncertain light against the encroaching darkness. Sleepy children clung to their mothers' skirts, their eyes wide with a fear they couldn't yet comprehend. Men, their faces etched with concern, called out to each other, their voices hushed but urgent. This village, like so many others scattered across the land during the Joseon period, was a tight-knit community. We shared customs, traditions, stories, our lives interwoven like the threads of a well-worn tapestry. News, especially unsettling news, traveled through this village like wildfire. Normally, the juiciest whispers were exchanged at the gossip corner, a designated spot where the women of the village gathered to share the latest happenings. Who had married whom, whose kimchi was the most potent, whose son was causing the most trouble. I doubted even the most imaginative gossiper had ever conjured a tale of a dragon's whisper. The thought brought a bitter taste to my mouth. This wasn't gossip. This was a warning. A warning that threatened to unravel the very fabric of our close-knit existence. Would this news, this terrifying prophecy, spread beyond our small village? Would it reach the ears of the court, nestled within the grand walls of the capital? Historians still debate the extent of social mobility in Joseon society, the intricate dance between family, community, and the distant power of the royal court. Did whispers from humble villages like ours ever reach the gilded ears of those in power? Tonight I prayed they did. I stumbled to a halt in the center of the village, my chest heaving, my voice still trembling. I pointed towards the looming silhouette of Gyeomsongdae, the ancient observatory that stood sentinel over our lives. There! On the slope! The shaman dreamt of a dragon, coiled around the observatory, its scales the color of the setting sun. He heard its whisper, a warning of fire, a warning of... My voice cracked. I struggled to find the words, to convey the sheer terror that still clung to me. A warning of destruction. The quiet night, once a comforting blanket, now felt heavy with apprehension. The murmur of frightened voices, once a familiar lullaby of village life, now pulsed with unease. The air crackled with a shared fear, a collective holding of breath. The village, once slumbering peacefully beneath the watchful gaze of the stars, was now wide awake and alarmed. Faces, etched with worry and disbelief, turned towards Gyeomsongdae. Some whispered prayers to the heavens, their hands clasped tightly together. Others muttered amongst themselves, their voices hushed and urgent. The elders, their faces lined with years of wisdom and experience, huddled together, their brows furrowed in deep thought. The children, their earlier sleepiness replaced by a dawning comprehension of the gravity of the situation, clung tightly to their parents, their small faces pale in the flickering lamplight. The night stretched on, a canvas of fear and uncertainty. The dragon's whisper, once a distant echo in a shaman's dream, now reverberated through the heart of the village, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that shaped our lives. The quiet hum of village life, usually a comforting melody of familiar sounds, had been replaced by a dissonant chorus of whispered anxieties and unspoken fears. We were a community bound together not just by shared traditions and customs, but now by a shared fear, a shared premonition of a future shrouded in the shadow of a dragon's wing. The air hung thick with the dust of 100 hurried tasks. My nose itched, a familiar tickle that blossomed into a full-blown sneeze. Dust motes, stirred up by the frantic activity, danced in the afternoon sunbeams, slanting through the cracks in the wooden walls. Fear, sharp and cold, pricked at the edges of the general bustle, but it didn't paralyze. It spurred us on. The whispers of the approaching disaster, whatever form it might take, had galvanized the village into a flurry of preparation. We moved with a practiced urgency, born from generations of facing uncertainty. Grandmother, her face etched with grim determination, directed the packing of dried fish and kimchi into earthenware jars. Even little Sora, normally a whirlwind of mischief, moved with a quiet focus, carefully stacking bundles of dried herbs. My own hands, already raw and blistered, hauled sacks of rice from the storage shed, the coarse fabric scratching against my skin. Every grain felt precious, a potential shield against the gnawing hunger that might soon descend upon us. The rhythmic thud of axes echoed from the forest's edge as the men felled trees to reinforce the rickety perimeter wall. Others sharpened their farming tools, transforming sickles and hoes into makeshift weapons. These were simple implements, inadequate against a trained army, but they represented a defiant refusal to surrender, a desperate hope for protection. Water, drawn from the well and the nearby stream, filled every available container. Large clay pots, usually reserved for fermenting sauces, now held the promise of survival. Even the children, their small faces mirroring the anxieties of their parents, helped carry the brimming buckets, their laughter momentarily piercing the tense atmosphere. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, families huddled together in their homes. The usual evening chatter was replaced by hushed whispers and anxious glances. We shared what little we had, knowing the disaster, whether famine or war, often struck indiscriminately. I helped old Mr. Kim reinforce the shutters on his windows, hammering the wooden planks with a strength I didn't know I possessed. His grateful smile, a flicker of warmth in the gathering gloom, was a small but potent reward. The Joseon dynasty, a period spanning over 5 centuries, had seen its share of turmoil. Invasions from neighboring countries, internal rebellions, and the capricious whims of nature had forced generations of villagers like us to develop intricate strategies for survival. This wasn't new territory. Our ancestors had weathered similar storms, their resilience woven into the very fabric of our village. Grandmother told stories of her own grandmother burying family heirlooms, a jade pendant, a silver hairpin, in the garden during a period of unrest. She chuckled, recalling how the poor woman had later spent weeks digging, unable to remember the exact spot where she'd hidden her treasures. This quirky tradition, born out of necessity and often tinged with humor, was a testament to the unpredictable nature of life in those times. Even now, I wondered how many forgotten treasures lay hidden beneath the soil of our village, silent witnesses to past calamities. Historians still debate the effectiveness of Joseon military defenses. Some argue that the fortifications were inadequate, easily breached by invading forces. Others point to the resilience of the villagers, their ability to organize and resist, as a crucial factor in their survival. The impact of war and famine on village life is another topic of ongoing discussion. Did burying valuables truly protect families from ruin? Or was it a desperate act of faith, offering a sliver of hope in the face of overwhelming odds? These are questions that echo down through the centuries, reminding us of the complexities of the past. The day bled into twilight, and the village settled into an uneasy quiet. The air, still thick with dust, now carried the scent of wood smoke and the earthy aroma of damp soil. The usual evening sounds, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, were muted, replaced by a palpable sense of anticipation. We ate our meager evening meal in silence, each bite a reminder of the uncertain days ahead. The children, usually boisterous at this hour, were subdued, their wide eyes reflecting the flickering lamplight. We huddled together, drawing strength from one another's presence, a small island of humanity against the vast, encroaching darkness. Outside, the night deepened, swallowing the last vestiges of light. A dog barked in the distance, a lonely, mournful sound that seemed to echo the anxieties that gripped the village. The wind whispered through the trees, a restless sigh that spoke of change, of upheaval, of the unknown that awaited us with the dawn. We waited, holding our breath, bracing ourselves for whatever the coming day might bring. The latch clicked, a small, familiar sound in the growing darkness. I pushed open the door, the hinges groaning a soft welcome. My family was huddled around the dying embers of the hearth, faces etched with a familiar blend of anxiety and weary hope. My wife, Mina, rose as I entered, her eyes questioning. The children, little Jin, and even littler Soo-jin, clung to her skirts, their eyes wide and dark. "What news, husband?" Mina asked, her voice barely a whisper. I closed the door behind me, the simple act feeling like sealing us away from the world. A world that was about to change. "Bad news," I admitted, my voice heavy. "The magistrate," he confirmed it. "The drought is going to be worse than we thought." "Famine." He spoke of starvation, disease. I trailed off, unable to voice the horrors I'd heard whispered in hushed tones in the magistrate's office. Mina's face paled, but there was a steely glint in her eyes. She was a farmer's wife, accustomed to hardship. She didn't scream or cry. She simply turned and began to move with a practiced efficiency. She rummaged through the storage jars, her movements brisk and decisive. Rice, beans, dried seaweed. Every precious morsel was carefully gathered and placed in a small cloth sack. Jin, ever helpful, mimicked his mother, carefully placing a few small potatoes into a smaller bag. Sujin, still too young to understand, clutched a small wooden tiger amulet, her thumb rubbing over its smooth surface. It was a childish trinket, meant to ward off evil spirits or even tigers, though a hungry tiger shouldn't dream of teeth. The thought, absurd as it was, brought a flicker of a bitter smile to my lips. Family. It was everything. It was the reason we toiled, the reason we endured. In our Joseon traditions, family was the bedrock, the unshakable foundation of our lives. We would sacrifice everything for each other, a silent vow renewed every day with the rising sun. I watched Mina and the children, their quiet determination mirroring my own resolve. We would face this together. The historical weight of our situation pressed upon me. I knew that throughout Joseon history, families like ours had faced similar hardships. They had endured wars, famines, and countless other trials, their bonds strengthened by shared adversity. We were part of that lineage, that unbroken chain of resilience. As Mina worked, I went to the corner where my farming tools leaned against the wall. The hoe, the spade, the sickle. Tools that had always felt like extensions of my own hands. Now, in the flickering lamplight, they seemed different, heavier, almost menacing. Tools of sustenance, yes, but also potential weapons. Though tigers, I thought again, really shouldn't dream of teeth. The thought kept returning, a strange, almost comforting mantra in the face of the unknown. Our home, small and humble, had always been a haven. Mud walls, a thatched roof, a simple hearth. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Tonight, it felt like a fortress against the encroaching darkness. The fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating a sense of warmth and security that belied the fear that gnawed at our hearts. The night deepened. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the anxiety that hung heavy in the air. We ate a meager meal, savoring each bite as if it might be our last. We spoke little. Words seemed inadequate in the face of the coming storm. After the meal, Mina tucked the children into bed, whispering soothing words, ancient lullabies passed down through generations. I watched them sleep, their small faces peaceful in the dim light. Sujin still clutched her tiger amulet. I thought about the open debates among historians regarding the true roles of women in Joseon society. They analyzed court records, family letters, and fragmented narratives, trying to piece together the lives of women who lived centuries ago. Did they capture the strength, the resilience, the quiet heroism of women like Mina? Did they understand the burdens they bore, the sacrifices they made? Did tigers dream of teeth? The question, absurd and out of place, echoed in my mind. We sat in silence, Mina and I, listening to the wind and the murmur of frightened voices from the other houses in our small village. The fear was palpable, a living thing that crept through the cracks in the walls, settling like a shroud over the village. We were not alone in our fear, but in that shared fear, there was also a strange sense of unity. We were a community, bound together by the land, by our shared history, by the coming hardship. We would face it together, as families, as a village, as a people. The night was long and the shadows deep, but in the heart of our small home, a flicker of resolve burned bright. We would survive. We had to. The rapping came just as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, painting the paper windows a fiery orange. 3 sharp knocks, hesitant, like a bird testing the strength of a branch. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Was she back about the sneeze? Surely one involuntary expulsion of air couldn't warrant a second visit. I slid open the door to find the shaman standing on my doorstep, her wrinkled face etched with a gravity I hadn't seen before. Gone were the playful glint in her eyes, the almost mischievous twitch of her lips. Tonight, she was all business. The wind whipped around her, tugging at the fringes of her hempen robes, making them dance like restless spirits. "You must leave," she said, her voice low and urgent, barely a whisper above the rising wind. "Take your family and go to the mountains." My heart hammered against my ribs. "The mountains? Why?" "Danger comes," she replied, her eyes dark pools reflecting the dying light. "A storm is brewing. Hide until it passes." My mind raced. Mountains. Refuge. I'd heard tales from my grandfather of villagers fleeing to the high slopes during times of unrest, seeking shelter amongst the towering peaks and dense forests. He'd spoken of how the mountains, during the Joseon dynasty, became sanctuaries, providing concealment and offering access to the bounty of nature, wild herbs, edible roots, and fresh water. History seemed to be repeating itself, pressing down on us with the weight of generations past. "The mountains," I murmured, the word a question hanging in the air. The shaman nodded, her gaze unwavering. "The Sanshin will protect you." Sanshin, the mountain spirits. My grandmother used to tell stories of these benevolent entities, guardians of the peaks, protectors of those who showed respect. Or, she'd add with a wink, those who had really good hiding skills. I wasn't sure which category we'd fall into. The thought of relying on the whims of mythical beings for survival felt precarious. I knew, too, that the effectiveness of such a strategy was a topic of much debate amongst historians. Some argued that fleeing to the mountains was a shrewd tactic, delaying the inevitable, buying precious time. Others dismissed it as a futile gesture, merely postponing capture or worse. Did the mountains offer true refuge? A place where danger couldn't reach? Or were they simply a beautiful illusion, a temporary reprieve before the inevitable storm broke? Did the mountains themselves dream of such things, I wondered, their stony slopes witnessing the endless cycle of human hope and despair? "Thank you," I said, bowing deeply to the shaman. I ushered her inside, my heart heavy with a mixture of gratitude and dread. I offered her the last of our rice cakes and dried fish, a meager offering, but all we had left. I hoped the Sanshin, if they existed, didn't dream of teeth. The shaman accepted the food with a solemn nod, her eyes holding mine for a moment longer before she turned and disappeared into the gathering darkness. The night was a flurry of frantic activity. We packed what little we owned. A few clothes, some blankets, a small pot for cooking, the precious family heirloom, a small jade pendant passed down through generations. My wife moved with a quiet efficiency, her face pale but resolute. The children, too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, whimpered with tiredness, their small faces mirroring the fear in my own heart. Our home, usually filled with the comforting smells of cooking and the echoes of laughter, now felt cold and hollow, a shell we were about to abandon. By the time the first sliver of moon appeared, we were ready. Our bundles strapped to our backs, we stepped out into the night, the silence broken only by the crunch of our footsteps on the frost-covered ground. The air was crisp and cold, the stars blazing like a million diamonds scattered across the velvet canvas of the sky. We walked in silence, our shadows stretching long and distorted in the moonlight, each of us lost in our own thoughts. As we reached the edge of the village, a distant dog barked, the sound echoing through the stillness of the night. It was a lonely sound, a mournful sound, a sound that seemed to encapsulate the uncertainty that lay ahead. We pressed on, heading towards the looming shadows of the mountains, our destination unknown, our future uncertain, our hope a fragile flame flickering in the darkness. The mountains waited, silent and watchful, their peaks shrouded in mystery, their slopes promising both sanctuary and peril. We were placing our lives, our future, in their keeping, and in the hands of the Sanshin, if they existed at all. As the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, I led my family into the mountains. The air, still cool from the night, held the scent of pine and damp earth. This path, known only to our village, was a lifeline, a secret whispered down through generations. It wound through a dense forest of ancient pines, their branches interwoven like gnarled fingers, obscuring the sky. Underfoot, the path was a mosaic of rock and root, worn smooth by countless footsteps before ours. It felt like walking back in time, each step echoing the journeys of our ancestors who had sought refuge and sustenance in these very mountains. The path climbed steadily, twisting and turning, revealing glimpses of the valley below. The rice paddies, once our livelihood, now lay abandoned, stark reminders of the famine that gripped our land. Joseon villagers, like us, have always possessed a detailed knowledge of the local terrain. This wasn't just about finding the quickest route from one village to another, it was about knowing where the hidden springs flowed, where the edible plants grew, and where the game could be found. In these mountains, this knowledge was the difference between life and death. Our ancestors knew these slopes, these trees, like the back of their hands. They knew where the wild boar roamed and where the pheasants nested. This intimate understanding of the land was our inheritance, a legacy passed down through generations, and now it was our only hope. The rocky slopes grew steeper, forcing us to slow our pace. I carried our youngest, Jisoo, on my back, her small head resting against my shoulder. Her soft breaths were a constant reminder of what I was fighting for. My wife, Hana, walked beside me, her face etched with worry, but her eyes determined. She carried a small bundle containing the few precious belongings we had managed to salvage: a worn blanket, a small pouch of dried beans, and a wooden comb she had received from her mother. Our older children, Ta Ihyun and Mi Young, followed closely behind, their small hands gripping the rocks for balance. They were tired and hungry, but they didn't complain. They understood the gravity of our situation. They understood that these mountains were our only sanctuary. The mountain path, winding upward into the darkness beneath the canopy, became a tunnel through time. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches filtering the weak sunlight, creating an ethereal, almost mystical atmosphere. We moved in a world of muted greens and browns, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves under our feet and the occasional call of a bird hidden deep within the foliage. Slowly, the sky began to lighten. The first rays of sunlight pierced the dense canopy, casting long, dancing shadows on the forest floor. The air grew warmer, and the murmur of the forest became more pronounced. The rustling of leaves, the chirping of insects, the distant call of a cuckoo. All the subtle sounds of the awakening mountain began to weave together, creating a symphony of life that both soothed and invigorated. The thought of wild ginseng flitted through my mind. A valuable commodity in the Joseon period, it was believed to hold almost magical medicinal properties. It was said that a single root found in these remote mountain areas could restore health and vigor to the ailing. If we were lucky enough to stumble upon some, our famine could turn into a feast. The thought offered a flicker of hope in the darkness of our situation. A single root could be traded for enough rice to feed our family for weeks, maybe even months. It was a long shot, but in our desperate circumstances, even the smallest possibility offered a glimmer of hope. The debate about how Joseon society's use of the mountain resources is one I've only briefly overheard among scholars. Did the constant search for valuable commodities like ginseng damage the mountain ecosystems? Did the ginseng flee too, driven deeper into the wilderness by the relentless pursuit of men? These were questions for scholars, not for a starving farmer like me. My concern was not the long-term health of the mountains, but the immediate survival of my family. I needed to find food, shelter, and safety. The philosophical debates of scholars seemed a world away from the harsh realities of our situation. We continued our climb, the path becoming even more treacherous. The rocks were loose and slippery, and the drop-offs grew increasingly precipitous. Every step required careful consideration, every movement a conscious effort to maintain balance. I held Jisoo tighter, feeling the weight of her small body against my back. She stirred slightly, her hand reaching up to touch my cheek. The simple gesture, the innocent touch, filled me with a renewed sense of determination. The air grew thinner as we climbed higher. The trees began to thin out, replaced by scrub brush and exposed rock. The view opened up, revealing the vast expanse of the mountain range stretching out before us. The peaks, shrouded in mist, seemed to touch the sky. The beauty of the landscape was breathtaking, but it also filled me with a sense of awe and trepidation. These mountains were both a sanctuary and a challenge. They offered refuge, but they also demanded respect. We finally reached a small plateau, a relatively flat area nestled amongst the towering peaks. It was a place of stark beauty, a world of rock and sky, where the wind whistled through the crags and the silence was broken only by the cry of a hawk circling overhead. This was where we would rest, where we would try to rebuild our lives, far from the famine and the despair that had gripped our village. This was our new beginning, our flight into the mountains. The air thinned with every upward step, lungs burning with the exertion. Finally, the familiar outcropping of rock came into view, half hidden by a curtain of ivy. My hand, scraped and bruised, reached out, tracing the cool, damp surface of the stone. Yes, this was it. The entrance, barely more than a fissure, was concealed by a tangle of thorny bushes. Pushing them aside, I squeezed through, the scent of damp earth, and something faintly sweet filling my nostrils. I was home. This cave, this wasn't just a shelter. It was a memory, a relic of a childhood spent exploring these mountains, a secret world shared only with the wind and the whispering trees. We'd called it the Sky Fortress, imagining ourselves as exiled royalty, protected by these stone walls. We'd bring up treasures, smooth gray river stones, feathers shed by hawks, wildflowers with petals like stained glass, and arranged them on a flat rock, our makeshift altar to the mountain spirits. Now, the altar was gone, covered in a fine layer of dust, but the feeling remained. A sense of safety, of being held. My pack, heavy with the weight of necessity, slid off my shoulders. I unpacked methodically, laying out my meager supplies: the dried meat and fruit, the water skin, the small bundle of herbs, the flint and steel, creating order in this small space, building a temporary home within the earth's embrace. It felt right, like slipping into a well-worn coat on a cold day. A primal instinct, perhaps. Caves. They've sheltered people for millennia. I remember reading somewhere that throughout Korean history, villagers fleeing unrest, driven from their homes by war or famine, would often seek refuge in these mountain hideaways. Protection from both the elements and the far more dangerous storms of human conflict. Solid stone against the chaos of the world. Another quirky fact tickled the edge of my memory. Cave paintings. Prehistoric art hidden away in the depths of these mountains, remnants of a time long gone. Images of animals, of hunters, of hands reaching out across the centuries. Did those cavemen, huddled around flickering fires, dream? Did they dream of the future, of the world we inhabit now? I thought of the Joseon dynasty, of the villages nestled in the valleys below. Historians still debate the relationship between those settled communities and the people who lived in these mountains, the hermits, the outcasts, the fiercely independent clans. Were they completely isolated? Or did they interact, trade goods, share stories, share dreams? The need for fire overruled my musings. Carefully, I gathered small branches and twigs, adding a handful of dried leaves. The smoky herbs I saved for later. I was getting good at identifying them now, the ones that produced a thin, almost invisible smoke, less likely to betray my location. The flames caught, flickering to life, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. Warmth spread through the small space, chasing away the lingering chill. This cave, a refuge in the heights, my refuge. Outside, the sky was fully light now, but the dense canopy of trees still filtered the sunlight, creating a dappled pattern on the forest floor. The wind rustled through the leaves, a constant whisper, a lullaby. It was a sound I remembered from childhood, a sound that spoke of peace, of solitude, of being hidden away from the world. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, the scent of pine needles and damp earth filling my lungs. The mountain held me close, a silent promise of sanctuary. For how long, I didn't know, but for now, it was enough. For now, I was safe. For now, I could dream. Days bled into weeks, marked only by the slow creep of shadows across the cave mouth. The incessant sneezing that had plagued me initially had subsided, replaced by the sweet, earthy scent of wildflowers blooming on the hillsides. The dust of the road had settled, both literally and metaphorically, allowing me a fragile peace. I was no longer choking on the unknown, but breathing in the quiet rhythm of the mountain. My forays down to the village became a ritual, a necessary tether to the world beyond the cave. Always under the cloak of darkness, I moved like a wraith through the sleeping streets. The rough-spun farmer's garb I'd scavenged had become my second skin. I'd learned to walk with a peasant's gait, head down, shoulders slumped, blending into the shadows like a stray dog. It was a strange sort of liberation, this anonymity. No one looked twice at a weary farmer returning late from the fields. No one suspected the secrets I carried. Information was a precious commodity in these times. It moved at a glacial pace, creeping from village to village on the tongues of traveling merchants and itinerant monks. News was often weeks old by the time it reached these remote valleys, distorted and embellished with each retelling. Sometimes a royal messenger would arrive, his horse lathered and flanks heaving, bearing an official decree sealed with the king's vermilion stamp. But those were rare occurrences, reserved for matters of great import. One of the more unusual methods of communication I'd learned about involved trained falcons. Magnificent birds, they were, capable of soaring great distances, carrying small scrolls attached to their legs. Messages from remote outposts could reach the royal court in a matter of hours, bypassing the slow, meandering routes of land-bound messengers. I often wondered, as I watched hawks circle high above the valley, if those feathered couriers dreamt of the messages they carried. Did they understand the weight of the words entrusted to them, the hopes and fears contained within those tightly rolled scrolls? The effectiveness of the Joseon communication network is still a matter of debate among historians. Some argue that its decentralized nature and reliance on oral transmission led to inefficiencies and misinformation, hindering the government's ability to respond effectively to crises. Others maintain that the system, while slow, was remarkably resilient, allowing for the dissemination of information across vast distances despite limited technology. And then there's the gossip. Did it travel by falcon, too? Did whispers of court intrigue and village scandals soar on the wind, carried on the wings of those majestic birds? I imagined the falcons, perched atop the palace walls, exchanging secrets in their shrill cries. It was during one of my clandestine visits to the village that I overheard the whispers. At first, they were just fragments, snatches of conversation carried on the night wind. Words like Manchu, invasion, and war floated in the air, heavy with foreboding. I dismissed them initially, attributing them to the usual village rumor mill. But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The villagers' faces, normally etched with the weariness of rural life, now held a new expression: fear. Then, one night, huddled in the shadows of the village well, I heard it confirmed. The Manchu had crossed the Yalu River. War had come. The Black Dragon's prophecy, the one I had so readily dismissed as the ramblings of a delusional old man, was unfolding before my very eyes. The dragon wasn't just being dramatic. It was a harbinger, a warning I'd been too blind to see. I returned to the cave that night, my heart pounding in my chest. The refuge I had found now felt like a prison, trapping me in this valley as the world outside descended into chaos. The distant rumble of drums, carried on the wind from the valley below, confirmed the villagers' fears. The war was getting closer. The sounds of battle, once just imagined threats, were now a tangible reality. The cave, which had offered solace and protection, now felt suffocating. The silence, once a balm to my frayed nerves, now echoed with the unspoken dread of what was to come. The world outside, once a distant concern, was now pressing in on me, threatening to shatter the fragile peace I had found. That night, I sat at the mouth of the cave, staring up at the night sky. It was a breathtaking display, a tapestry of stars, stretching across the inky blackness. They seemed so distant, so untouched by the turmoil unfolding below. I found a strange comfort in their unwavering presence, a reminder that despite the chaos of human affairs, some things remained constant. The stars had witnessed countless wars, countless tragedies, and yet they continued to shine, indifferent to the fleeting dramas of mankind. I wondered if, somewhere out there, among those distant stars, there was another soul looking up at the same sky, sharing the same sense of awe and dread, and I wondered what the dawn would bring. The shaman's dream. I should have written it down. The fire in her eyes, the frantic gestures, the guttural chants, they're all a blur now, swirling together like smoke from a dying fire. But the falling stars, those I remember, vivid, burning streaks against the inky blackness. I still see them when I close my eyes. I still don't understand what they truly meant. At the time, I thought they represented war, the inevitable clash between the Joseon and the Manchu. The rumbles we felt in the earth, the whispers carried on the wind, all pointed towards a coming storm. But now, huddled in this cold, damp cave, I realized the falling stars meant something more, something far greater. They weren't just about war. They were about the crumbling of everything we knew, the very foundations of our world. They were about the end of the Joseon dynasty itself. The Joseon, it has stood for centuries, a beacon of stability in a tumultuous world. But the Manchu, they are a relentless tide, crashing against our shores again and again. The 17th century has been nothing but a series of invasions, each one chipping away at the dynasty's strength, leaving cracks in the once impenetrable walls. The court is in disarray, the officials bickering amongst themselves, while the common people suffer. The stability we once took for granted is gone, replaced by fear and uncertainty. I remember old Master Pak, the royal astronomer, hunched over his turtle shells, muttering incantations. He'd use them to divine the future, to glean some insight into the heavens' will. Or, on particularly lean days, he'd make soup. He always claimed the future tasted of ginseng and sorrow. I wonder what he'd make of this slow, agonizing collapse. Would he see it in the cracks of a shell? Would he taste it in his broth? Even now, scholars argue about the true impact of the Manchu invasions. Some say it strengthened Joseon, forcing us to adapt and innovate. Others claim it irrevocably damaged our culture, leaving a scar that never truly healed. Did the turtles flee the shells when the future looked bleak? Did they sense the coming chaos? I suppose we'll never truly know. History, like the whispers of a shaman, is open to interpretation. The shaman, her dream wasn't just a dream, it was a prophecy, a glimpse into a future I'm now living. She saw the falling stars, the crumbling dynasty, the suffering of our people. She tried to warn us. But who listens to the ravings of a shaman, especially when they speak of such unimaginable things? We prefer to cling to the illusion of stability, to the familiar comfort of the established order, even as it crumbles around us. This cave, it's a temporary haven, a brief respite from the violence that engulfs the land. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth and fear. We're a small group, huddled together for warmth and comfort, whispering stories to keep the darkness at bay. Farmers, merchants, scholars, all brought together by the shared threat, the shared loss. We cling to the hope that this too shall pass, that the dawn will eventually break and bring with it some semblance of peace. But the sounds of war are closer now, the distant rumble of drums, the sharp clang of steel, the agonized cries of men, they echo through the narrow passages, a constant reminder of the horrors that await us outside. Even in this hidden sanctuary, we are not safe. The shadow of the Manchu hangs heavy over us, a constant threat, a promise of more violence to come. I peek through a crack in the rocks. The night sky, once a comforting blanket of stars, is now partially obscured by smoke. The distant glow of burning villages paints the clouds in eerie orange. The falling stars of the shaman's dream, were they meteors burning brightly as they entered our atmosphere? Or were they burning homes, falling from grace, mirroring the fate of our dynasty? Perhaps both. Perhaps the universe has a strange way of weaving together the celestial and the earthly, the cosmic and the human. Perhaps the shaman, in her trance, glimpsed this connection, saw the threads of fate intertwining, and understood the true meaning of the falling stars. And perhaps, just perhaps, if I had listened more closely, if I had understood the true meaning of her warning, we could have done something, anything, to prevent this catastrophe. But now, all we can do is hide and pray for a future we may never see. The farming tools, once symbols of life and sustenance, now felt heavy, cold, different in my grip. They were no longer tools for coaxing life from the earth, but instruments meant to protect it, to defend it. The smooth handle of the pitchfork, worn smooth by years of labor, now felt like the grip of a spear. The hoe, its blade dulled by countless seasons tilling the soil, now seemed sharp, capable of inflicting damage. These simple tools, extensions of my hands in the fields, were now extensions of my will to fight. I knew I had to go back. Not for glory, not for vengeance, but for something far more profound. Duty. It wasn't just my family I had to protect. It was the entire village, our community, the patchwork of rice paddies and thatched roofs that made up our world. It was the rhythm of life we'd carved out of the unforgiving mountainside, a life of shared hardships and shared joys. It was the laughter of children playing in the dust, the comforting aroma of cooking fires at dusk, the stories passed down from generation to generation. All of it, our entire way of life, was under threat. And I, along with every other able-bodied man and woman in our village, had a duty to defend it. I had heard the stories from my grandfather, tales of how villagers, armed with nothing more than their farming tools and a fierce determination, banded together to protect their homes during times of unrest. He'd told me how they formed local militias, how every man, woman, and even child old enough to hold a stick played a role in defending their community. He'd spoken of a shared responsibility, a deep-rooted understanding that their survival depended on their collective strength. He'd emphasized it was a Joseon tradition, a responsibility passed down through the generations. He'd also told me, with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, about the bamboo spears. Apparently every household kept a stash of sharpened bamboo stalks, ostensibly for scaring off wild boar, or, as he'd put it with a wink, nosy neighbors. But everyone knew their true purpose. They were a readily available, easily concealed weapon, a silent testament to the ever-present threat of violence and the villagers' quiet preparedness. The thought of those bamboo spears, so commonplace, so seemingly innocuous, now filled me with a grim sense of purpose. They were a symbol of our resilience, our resourcefulness, our refusal to be victims. Even now, historians debate the effectiveness of these peasant militias. Were they truly a fighting force capable of repelling trained soldiers? Or were they more of a symbolic resistance, a way for ordinary people to assert their defiance in the face of overwhelming odds? Did the bamboo dream of piercing armor? Or was it simply a desperate hope wielded by desperate hands? The arguments raged on, the ink of scholars flowing like blood on ancient scrolls. But in the quiet of my heart, I knew one thing. Whether symbolic or not, our resistance was our only hope. We had to fight. We had to try. The air in the cave was thick, with a scent of damp earth and wood smoke. I turned to my wife, the words heavy in my throat. "I'm going back." She didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't cry. She simply nodded, her eyes a complex tapestry of emotions. Fear, certainly, but also pride, a quiet strength that mirrored my own resolve. She reached out and took my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. In that silent communion, in the shared weight of our unspoken fears and hopes, we found strength. We were in this together. The cave, our temporary sanctuary from the storm, now felt confining. I had to move, had to act. The first sliver of dawn was painting the sky a pale, ethereal gray, pushing back the darkness. But the sounds of war, the distant rumble of drums, the clash of steel, echoed through the mountains, a stark reminder of the violence that awaited me. It was a symphony of destruction, a prelude to the chaos I was walking into. Yet within me, a different kind of music played, the steady rhythm of my own heart, beating in time with the ancient drumbeat of duty. I picked up my pitchfork, its familiar weight, now a comfort, a promise. I kissed my wife's forehead, a silent vow to return. Then, I stepped out of the cave and into the dawning light, ready to face whatever awaited me. The farming tools, now weapons, felt right in my hands. I was a farmer, yes, but I was also a protector, a defender, and I was going home. As dawn painted the eastern sky with strokes of pale rose and gold, I led my family down the mountain path. Each step was measured, each rustle of leaves scrutinized. The air, crisp and cold, carried the scent of pine and something else, something acrid, like distant smoke. Fear, a cold knot in my stomach, tightened with every downward turn. The valley below, once a haven, was now a question mark etched in uncertainty. Were the Manchus still there? Had they razed our village to the ground? We moved like shadows, clinging to the edges of the path, my wife Hana holding our youngest, Jin, close to her chest. Our eldest, Sumin, walked with a seriousness that belied his 10 years, his eyes constantly scanning the trees. I could feel their fear mirroring my own, a silent chorus of apprehension. We knew the stories, the whispered tales of Manchu brutality, their swift horses and merciless swords. Skilled warriors they were, honed by years of conflict, their reputation preceding them like a chilling wind. Their scorched earth tactics were legendary, leaving behind a trail of devastation wherever they rode. I gripped my hoe, its newly sharpened blade gleaming in the nascent light. It was more than a farming tool now. It was a symbol of defiance, a desperate hope for protection. I was no longer just a farmer tending his fields. I was a husband, a father, a protector, ready to defend my family against the encroaching darkness. The mountain path, a familiar friend in happier times, now felt treacherous, each bend a potential ambush. It wound downwards, a serpentine ribbon of dirt and stone, leading us towards the unknown. The trees, once comforting in their familiarity, now seemed to watch us, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The sun climbed higher, casting long, dancing shadows that stretched and distorted across the path. The light, though welcome, also betrayed our movements, making us feel exposed, vulnerable. We listened intently, straining to decipher every sound. The distant clang of metal on metal, the faint echo of shouts, the crackling of fire, all spoke of a conflict that had yet to cease. Closer, the rustle of leaves, the snapping of twigs, kept us on edge, Our nerves frayed. Was it just the wind, or something else, something more sinister, tracking our descent? Hanna pointed to a thin plume of smoke rising in the distance. "A signal fire," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Villagers sometimes use smoke signals. A quick puff for lunchtime, a sustained column for danger. This one was somewhere between the two, its meaning ambiguous, adding another layer of unease to our already burdened hearts. Was it a warning, a plea for help, or simply someone preparing their morning meal, oblivious to the chaos that had engulfed the valley? The thought brought a bitter taste to my mouth. How could anyone be oblivious? The Manchu invasion had shattered the peace of our lives, tearing through our world like a wildfire. Historians, in their comfortable studies, debated the reasons behind the Manchu incursions. Territorial expansion? Political ambition? Did they dream of empire, of glory, while they trampled on the lives of simple farmers like me? Did they consider the cost, the human suffering, the shattered families, the burnt homes, the fear that now clung to us like a second skin? As we descended further, the sounds of conflict grew louder, sharper. The rhythmic thud of drums, the piercing cries of men, the whinnying of horses, the sounds of war, raw and brutal, filled the air. We pressed ourselves against the side of the mountain, seeking cover amongst the rocks and trees. Fear threatened to paralyze us, but we had to keep moving. We had to reach the valley to find out what had become of our home, our village, our neighbors. The path leveled out, and we found ourselves on the edge of the forest, overlooking the valley. From our vantage point, we could see the devastation wrought by the invaders. Smoke billowed from burning houses, fields lay scorched and barren, and the once vibrant village now resembled a ghost town. Manchu soldiers, clad in their distinctive armor, patrolled the streets, their swords glinting menacingly in the sunlight. My heart sank. The valley, our home, had become a battlefield. The question now was not whether the Manchu were still there, but how we were going to survive them. The acrid bite of smoke clawed at my throat, the heat a palpable wave washing over me. The village, it was burning. Flames licked at the thatched roofs, turning them into roaring infernos that sent plumes of black smoke spiraling into the once clear sky. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the thunder of hooves on the packed earth. Manchu soldiers, their faces grim masks etched with the lines of war, rode through the chaos. Their horses, snorting and restless, pranced amidst the wreckage, their eyes wide with the frenzy of the raid. The soldiers moved with a brutal efficiency, looting homes, tossing aside precious belongings like worthless trinkets, and setting fire to anything that remained. My own heart pounded like those falling stars I'd watched just nights ago, a chilling premonition now realized in the fiery destruction before me. They ripped silks and ceramics from homes, the remnants of lives carefully built now scattered and broken. Their harsh guttural shouts punctuated the crackling of the flames, a language I understood only as the voice of destruction. The Manchu invasions. How many villages had suffered this fate? How many families torn apart, homes reduced to ashes, lives shattered like dropped porcelain? History books spoke of widespread destruction, of displaced villagers wandering the ravaged countryside, of social and economic chaos that lingered for generations. But those dry words could never capture the raw, visceral horror unfolding before my eyes. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a fleeting thought, almost a whisper. Hidden tunnels. Some villages, I'd heard tales, had secret escape routes, underground shelters, where they could hide from the invaders. Did the people of my village have such a refuge? Did they even now huddle in the darkness, praying for deliverance, dreaming of escape while the world above them burned? The historians, they debated endlessly. Was this brutality a deliberate tactic, a calculated reign of terror meant to crush the spirit of the Joseon people? Or was it simply the inevitable consequence of war, the breakdown of military discipline in the face of easy plunder? Did it matter? Here, now, in the heart of this inferno, the academic arguments felt like hollow echoes in the face of such overwhelming suffering. Across the village square, I saw them. My neighbors. They weren't fleeing. They were fighting back. Against the trained, heavily armed Manchu soldiers, they stood their ground, a desperate, defiant resistance. They wielded farm tools, hoes, scythes, rakes, transformed into weapons of desperation. Bamboo spears, hastily crafted but wielded with fierce determination. Kitchen knives flashed in the firelight, reflecting the burning homes in their gleaming blades. Old Man Pak, the village elder, swung his walking stick like a club, his face a mask of fury. Young Choi, barely a man, lunged at a soldier with a pitchfork, his youthful features contorted in a primal scream. The scene was a maelstrom of chaos and violence. The air, thick with smoke, burned my lungs with each ragged breath. The shouts of the warriors mingled with the cries of the wounded, a horrific symphony of suffering. A woman stumbled past me, her face streaked with soot and tears, clutching a small child to her chest. The child, its eyes wide with terror, didn't cry, didn't make a sound. Just stared, uncomprehending, at the inferno that had once been their home. The clash of steel against steel, the thud of bodies hitting the ground, the screams. It was all a blur. A nightmare unfolding in the harsh light of day. The flames danced and crackled, casting grotesque shadows that writhed and twisted across the ravaged landscape. The smell of burning wood, of thatch, of flesh, it permeated everything, a sickeningly sweet stench that clung to the back of my throat. The ground was littered with broken furniture, shattered pottery, discarded weapons, and bodies. Joseon villagers, Manchu soldiers, lying side by side in the gruesome embrace of death. I watched, frozen in place, my mind struggling to comprehend the scale of the devastation. This wasn't just a raid, it was a massacre. A systematic destruction of everything I knew, everything I held dear. The vibrant, bustling village I had known was gone, reduced to a smoldering ruin. The familiar faces, the friendly smiles, the laughter that had once filled the air, all swallowed by the flames. And in their place, only the grim-faced soldiers, the restless horses, and the all-consuming fire. The village, once a haven, was now a tomb. The hoe, normally a tool of creation, felt alien in my grip, heavy and cold. Yet, it moved with a surprising swiftness, a brutal efficiency born of desperation. A Manchu soldier lunged, his curved sword flashing in the flickering torchlight. I parried, the wooden shaft of my hoe cracking under the impact, but holding. I thrust forward, the blunt metal head connecting with his chest, a sickening thud echoing in the night. He stumbled back, gasping, disbelieving. This was not the easy victory he had anticipated. Old Man Choi, his face streaked with soot and sweat, roared in triumph from beside me, his own makeshift weapon, a sharpened farming sickle dripping crimson. Sook, a woman I'd seen countless times haggling for rice in the market, moved with the grace of a dancer, a stolen Manchu saber whirling in her hand. She'd always been quick-witted, but now, with her face illuminated by the burning houses, she was terrifying. A whirlwind of righteous fury. We fought as one, a patchwork army of farmers, merchants, and housewives, united against a common enemy. Our fear was still there, a gnawing beast in our bellies, but it was overshadowed by something else, a fierce protectiveness for our homes, our families, for the very soil beneath our feet. We knew the odds. We knew the stories of villages razed, of lives stolen, but we would not surrender. We would fight for every inch of our land, for every breath of life. The air was thick with the stench of blood and burning wood. The screams of the wounded, both our own and the enemy's, were a chilling counterpoint to the clash of steel. The once familiar paths of our village were now choked with bodies, friend and foe intertwined in the macabre embrace of death. The smoke, thicker now, painted the sky a hellish orange, obscuring the stars and casting long, distorted shadows that danced like demons in the flickering firelight. I saw it then, in the eyes of a young Manchu soldier, barely older than my own son. It wasn't the bloodlust I expected, but fear, uncertainty. They had come expecting a swift conquest, a terrified populace scattering before their might. They had not expected this ferocious resistance from the people they considered beneath them. They had not expected farmers to fight. Sook moved like a wraith, appearing beside the young soldier, her saber a silver arc in the firelight. He raised his sword to parry, but he was too slow, too hesitant. The saber sliced through the air, a whisper of death, and he crumpled to the ground, his eyes wide with surprise and something else. Regret? I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, illuminated by the burning homes. They were tired, wounded, many grieving for lost loved ones. But in their eyes I saw no surrender, only a grim determination. We were Joseon. We were resilient. We would not break. Later, much later, when the smoke had cleared and the silence had finally returned, broken only by the sobs of the bereaved, I would learn the truth of our salvation. The Ming, our powerful neighbor, had intervened, their armies driving back the Manchu invaders. The Joseon dynasty would survive, though scarred and weakened, its resources depleted, its people grieving. The historical texts would tell of grand strategies and political maneuvering, of the Ming emperor's benevolence in aiding a weaker nation. But the whispers in the market, the stories passed down from mother to daughter, would tell a different story. A story of women, armed with kitchen knives and stolen swords, who stood shoulder to shoulder with their husbands and brothers, defending their homes and their families. They were the unsung heroes, the warrior women who defied expectations, who carved their own legends in the heart of the chaos. Did they dream, these women, of a world where their strength was not a necessity, but a choice? And what of the Ming? Did they dream? Did their emperor, sitting on his jade throne, dream of altruism, of a world where nations helped each other without thought of gain? Or did he dream of geopolitics, of strategic alliances and power plays, of a world where even acts of kindness served a greater purpose? The historians still debate the Ming's motivations, their arguments echoing the clash of steel and the cries of the wounded, a reminder that even in victory, the cost of war is always steep. But in the quiet of the night, as I looked at the ravaged fields and the burned-out shells of homes, I didn't think of emperors or politics. I thought of Suk, of Old Man Choi, of the ordinary people who had risen up, armed with hoes and sickles, and fought for their lives, their families, their land. They were the true heroes of this war, the farmers who became warriors, the villagers who became legends. It's hard to see the stars now, the sky a thick, angry canvas, smeared with the grime of battle. The air, acrid with smoke and the metallic tang of blood, burned in my lungs with each gasping breath. My muscles screamed in protest, each swing of my rusty sword a monumental effort. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. Not while they were still out there, those invaders, tearing at the fabric of our lives, threatening everything I held dear, my family, my home, my village. Survival was a flickering candle flame in the howling wind, and I was its desperate protector. Every clang of steel, every guttural cry, echoed the stories passed down through generations. Stories of invasions, of hardship, of resilience. The Manchu invasions, they had carved deep scars into our history, reshaping our world in ways we were still struggling to understand. They had dictated the course of our political life, the very structure of our society, even the subtle nuances of our culture. Their shadow stretched long and dark over the land. I remember my grandfather's stories, his voice low and trembling, recounting the humiliation of the tribute. After the invasions, our kings, the rulers of Joseon, were forced to send gifts to the Qing dynasty, a yearly ritual of subservience. A symbolic bowing of the head. He would spit on the ground after speaking of it, a mixture of shame and rage in his eyes. I wonder if, behind the stoic masks of royalty, behind the closed doors of the palace, our kings wept in their dreams. Did they dream of subjugation, of their ancestors turning in their graves? The historians in the capital argue endlessly about the choices made by our rulers. Pragmatic compromise, some call it. A necessary evil to ensure the survival of our people. Others speak of betrayal, of a national pride sacrificed at the altar of expediency. The debate rages on, echoing the clash of steel on this very battlefield. But here, in the heart of the chaos, there are no academic arguments, only the stark reality of survival. Suddenly, a shift in the tide. A flicker, a spark, in the oppressive darkness. Through the smoke and the swirling dust, I saw them. Reinforcements. From the neighboring village. Farmers, like us, but armed and ready. Their faces, grim and resolute, mirrored my own desperate hope. They charged into the fray, their shouts adding a new layer to the cacophony of battle. A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. We weren't alone. The village, moments before on the precipice of destruction, now pulsed with a fragile, nascent hope. The tide of battle, still uncertain, had at least begun to turn. The enemy, momentarily surprised by the arrival of fresh fighters, faltered. Their advance, relentless until now, stuttered and stalled. The chaos remained, a swirling vortex of violence and desperation. But now, within its heart, a glimmer of light. The distant thud of drums, the blare of horns carried on the wind, more reinforcements. The sound invigorated us, filling our weary limbs with renewed strength. We fought with the ferocity of cornered animals, fueled by the hope of survival, by the sight of our comrades joining the fight. The enemy, caught between our desperate defense and the arrival of fresh troops, began to waver. The smoke, thick and suffocating only moments before, began to dissipate, torn apart by the wind. Through the gaps, patches of the setting sun bled onto the ravaged landscape. A fiery orange, a defiant splash of color against the encroaching darkness. It was a beautiful sight, a stark contrast to the carnage surrounding us. A reminder of the world beyond this battlefield, a world we were fighting to protect. The sun, sinking below the horizon, seemed to cast a benediction on our struggle, a silent promise of a new dawn. The battle still raged, the outcome still uncertain, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a flicker of hope, an ember, glowing faintly in the ashes of despair. And I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that we would not be broken. The Manchu horsemen were gone, driven back across the Yalu River by the combined might of the Joseon army and the desperate fury of villagers defending their homes. Victory, however, felt hollow. Our village, once a vibrant tapestry of life and laughter, now lay in ruins. Charred timbers reached towards the sky like skeletal fingers. The familiar scent of wood smoke, once comforting, now choked the air, thick with the acrid tang of ashes. I longed to look up, to see the familiar constellations, to feel that comforting connection to something larger than myself, something beyond this devastation. But the smoke obscured the heavens, a dark shroud mirroring the despair that threatened to engulf me. My hands moved almost automatically, tearing strips of cloth, cleaning wounds, offering what little comfort I could to my injured neighbors. Old Man Pak, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, gritted his teeth and bore the pain with stoic silence. Young Suni, her face streaked with soot and tears, clung to her mother, her whimpers a heartbreaking counterpoint to the crackling embers. We were all wounded, some physically, others in the deeper, more insidious ways that war inflicts. Amidst the wreckage, the spirit of survival flickered. Neighbors helped neighbors, sharing what little food and water remained. Hands, blistered and raw, sifted through the debris, salvaging what they could. A scorched cooking pot, a half-burnt length of silk, a child's wooden toy, miraculously intact. These small victories, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, were lifelines in the face of overwhelming loss. It was a stark reminder of what I had read in old scrolls, how rebuilding after war and famine was a constant challenge for Joseon communities, a cycle of destruction and renewal that demanded resilience and resourcefulness. It was a history etched not just on parchment, but in the calloused hands and weary eyes of the people around me. Just yesterday, we had shared rice cakes and stories under the warmth of the afternoon sun. Now, we shared the burden of rebuilding, the weight of grief. Mrs. Choi, her own house reduced to ashes, helped me gather stones to prop up a section of my crumbling wall. Her quiet strength, her unwavering determination to reclaim some semblance of normalcy, was infectious. It was a testament to the quirky yet profound sense of communal solidarity that bound our village together. Joseon villagers, the scrolls often noted, shared resources and labor after disasters, a tradition born not of obligation, but of a deep understanding of shared fate. The question lingers, debated even by learned scholars in the grand halls of the capital, about how effective the Joseon government truly was in providing relief after such calamities. Some argue that royal decrees and government aid were crucial, while others maintain that it was the resilience and self-sufficiency of local communities that truly mattered. Did the villagers of the past, facing similar devastation, dream of rebuilding? Did they, like us, find strength in their shared hardship? The smoke-filled air held no answers, only the echoes of our own uncertain hopes. I found my family huddled near the remnants of our kitchen. My husband, his face grim but his eyes filled with a fierce protectiveness, held our youngest child close. My eldest daughter, usually so boisterous, sat quietly, her hand resting on her younger brother's shoulder. Seeing them, alive and unharmed, a wave of gratitude washed over me, so profound it brought tears to my eyes. I remembered the tiger amulet I had placed around my son's neck that morning, a charm meant to ward off evil spirits. It hadn't been spirits that had threatened him, but a falling roof tile. The amulet hadn't saved him. Luck, perhaps, or the quick thinking of his sister, who had pulled him out of the way just in time. In that moment, the superstitions and fears seemed insignificant. All that mattered was that they were here, with me. I pulled them close, holding them tight, breathing in the scent of their hair, the familiar comfort of their presence anchoring me to the present. The rising moon, a pale disk in the smoke-hazed sky, cast an eerie glow over the village. The smoldering ruins, once our homes, now resembled the aftermath of some ancient, forgotten battle. Yet, amidst the devastation, there was a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air. The quiet murmur of voices, the clinking of salvaged metal, the rhythmic thud of someone's axe. These were the sounds of resilience, the first tentative steps towards rebuilding, towards reclaiming what had been lost. The scent of smoke and ashes still hung heavy, but beneath it, I could almost detect the faintest hint of hope, fragile yet persistent, like a seedling pushing its way through scorched earth. The night remained uncertain, the future shrouded in doubt, but for now, we were together, and that was enough. As the stars emerged from the dissipating smoke, I sat with my family on the slope at the foot of Gyeomsongdae. It felt like a lifetime ago we last sat here, the grass cool beneath us, the air still tinged with the acrid scent of burnt wood. Before the dragon, before the chaos, before the valley became a scar on the land. Back then, laughter echoed here, chasing fireflies in the twilight. Now, a quiet solemnity hung in the air, a shared understanding of what we had lost and what, miraculously, we had retained. The observatory stood sentinel above us, ancient and unchanging, a silent witness to the cycles of history. Its weathered stones seemed to absorb the starlight, radiating a quiet strength. It had seen kingdoms rise and fall, wars waged and peace brokered. It had seen the land scorched and bloom again. And now it watched over us, a small cluster of survivors huddled beneath its gaze. I remembered Halmeoni telling stories of the observatory, of Queen Seondeok, wise and strong, who commissioned its construction. Gyeomsongdae, she said, was a window to the heavens, a way to understand the rhythms of the universe. It was a testament to Korean ingenuity and resilience. Despite wars, famines, and political upheaval, it still stood, a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the face of destruction, human creation could endure. Halmeoni would also tell us tales of how Joseon villagers, generations ago, sometimes slept outdoors during the summer months, not just for the cool night air, she would add with a twinkle in her eye, but sometimes to escape the snoring of their neighbors. I smiled faintly at the memory, a small flicker of warmth in the face of the present chill. We might not have had neighbors anymore, but at least we had each other. I looked up at the constellations, their familiar patterns unchanged despite the chaos in the valley below. The dragon was gone. The sky, though tinged with the remnants of smoke, was clearing. The stars shone with a clarity that felt almost painful, a stark contrast to the darkness that had consumed our lives just days before. I knew life would be hard. The scars of war, both on the land and in our hearts, would linger. But for this moment, under the watchful gaze of the stars, I felt a measure of peace, a sense of continuity, a connection to something larger than myself, to the earth, to the past, to the future. We were part of a story that stretched back through generations, a story written in the very stars that glittered above us. Halmeoni used to say that the stars held the answers to everything, if only we knew how to read them. She would point out the constellations, whispering their names and legends, weaving tales of celestial emperors, mythical beasts, and the spirits of our ancestors. She believed that the heavens influenced the lives of ordinary people, guiding their destinies, offering comfort in times of trouble. I wondered now, looking at the vast expanse of the night sky, if she was right. Did others long ago find solace in these same stars? Did they look up and find hope in their unchanging presence, just as I did now? Historians still argue about the influence of astronomy and astrology on Joseon culture, about the role the stars played in the lives of ordinary people. But for me, in this moment, the stars offered a sense of perspective, a reminder that our struggles, however immense, were but a small part of a much larger cosmic drama. So there we were, on the cool grass, wrapped in the blanket of the night sky. Nothing but starlight and the soft chirping of crickets for company. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of pine from the distant mountains. I took a nice slow breath, letting the stillness of the night seep into me. My shoulders, tight with days of fear and exhaustion, finally began to relax. The quiet hum of the universe seemed to vibrate through me. A gentle lullaby. I let my gaze drift from one constellation to another, tracing the familiar outlines of the Great Bear, the Little Dipper, the celestial river that flowed across the heavens. I imagined Halmione's voice, whispering the stories behind the stars, and a wave of warmth washed over me. It was a comfort, a connection to a past that felt both distant and immeasurably close. I closed my eyes, allowing the quiet stillness to seep into every part of me. I felt the night, the quiet, and drifted deeper into that velvety darkness where dreams are made and worries fade away. Sleep came easily, a deep, dreamless slumber. I slept soundly, wrapped in the comforting embrace of the earth and sky. Maybe I dreamed of gentler times, of fireflies and laughter, of Halmione's stories and the warmth of a home that was no more. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a faint thought flickered. Don't forget that soft mattress you're lying on, the cool grass beneath you. Remember the secure walls, the open sky above, and the roof that won't fall on you, the watchful gaze of the stars. Hopefully, Sanshin, dragons, and tigers have found their own peaceful dreams. No teeth involved, just quiet, restful sleep under the vast, indifferent, and yet somehow comforting expanse of the night sky.